in this past week or so, one of the big stories that has been going on with the MMA world is the story where Jorge Masvidal pretty much attacked Colby Covington whilst he was out. I think it was in outside the Miami restaurant or something like that. And what happened is, from what is supposedly being told, Masvidal pretty much wore a hoodie, hid his face, and Colby was with a friend. And apparently, this is a lot of people feel like he may have been a bit of a setup, and that this friend told Masvidal where he was. I don't know, but because that happened, Masvidal's been arrested and said he may be facing 15 years in prison. All kinds of craziness is happening with this. It's still ongoing at the moment, so I don't know much about it. But it kind of got me thinking about this, because this whole thing happened because obviously the whole feud between Masvidal and Colby, we don't really know. I mean, we know what happened with Colby sort of switching and becoming, sort of creating this persona and this character, but it's never really been clear what the whole issue was with Masvidal. Like, Masvidal says it's to do with Colby not paying Masvidal's coach, which was his coach at the time. Colby says that it's because Masvidal's jealous. I don't know why, but ultimately, these two don't like each other. We saw this after the fight, even though it was all settled in the octagon. Masvidal was still saying stuff to Colby and vice versa. But yeah, and it all came about with Colby talking about, Masvidal a lot, talking about his ex-wife. Not really saying anything bad about his ex-wife, but just sort of mentioning his family. Talking about him being a deadbeat dad. Sort of somewhat mentioning his kids, but not really insulting them. And again, this is something that I do wonder, because in MMA, trash talking is a funny thing. And really, like, the person who really kicked this off in MMA was, the person who kicked it off was Chael Sonnen, because he would go a lot very personal. But the one who kind of became popular with it was Conor McGregor. And I do sort of look back at a lot of his older fights and look at what he was saying to like Jose Aldo, what he was saying to like Chad Mendes, what he was saying to Dustin Poirier and a lot of these other guys. It was never really that bad, I felt, the stuff that he was saying to these guys. But again, these Aldo specifically got really annoyed by it, and some guys kind of like the more respectful thing, and they prefer it to be a lot more peaceful. But one thing about Conor is, and I've always maintained this Conor now, who fought Dustin a few times, the one who fought Khabib, the trash talking since maybe the Mayweather fight against Khabib, it was more nasty than actually funny and witty like it used to be. And it made me laugh a little bit, because now everybody kind of looks at it and thinks that it was bad what he said to Khabib. But back then, I remember this, people found it hilarious and found it really funny. And I think, and this is an issue I think specifically for MMA. Don't get me wrong, you get it in boxing a little bit as well, but it's more MMA, I feel, because a lot of things that happen, Colby felt the need to create this character to be this loudmouth, to kind of stay in the UFC. And with him being this character, you kind of wonder, where does the limit go? And it's what I want to go through here is, how far does trash talking go in MMA before people kind of have to draw the line? And I know people often say the line is drawn with kids and family and stuff, but again, with Conor, he talked about Khabib's dad. He went very, very personal. And at the time, like I maintain, people had an issue with it who really understood it. I felt the situation from both sides, but a lot of people were, just found the whole thing hilarious. And it does make me think, like, in boxing, you don't really have many issues like this. Like, even look at the last sort of big rivalry that was sort of publicised was the Deontay Wilder-Tyson Fury fight. You had a few jabs in there, but it was never really personal to the point where they would fight. I mean, they would have before the third fight because of what Wilder was saying about Fury about him cheating, but it was never really that crazy. And I often think with trash talking, there are some guys who will often just chalk it up to, it's just a business and people got to say what they got to say to sell the fight. But when does that go too far? And when do you kind of almost blur the lines a little bit? Because I think people almost will, almost excuse anything people say as just trying to sell the fight. when Conor talked about Khabib's dad, he was just trying to sell the fight. When Colby says this stuff about Masvidal, he's just trying to sell the fight. But I don't know. I do wonder how far will it go. And with Masvidal doing what he did to Colby, I don't think it was. I don't really. What he said, Colby said about Masvidal, I don't think he ever to me went too far. But with Dustin Poirier, however, Colby has said a lot of personal stuff about his wife, about his daughter, which in that case, if Poirier went up to Masvidal and punched him, to Colby and punched him, I really can't blame him completely, because ultimately, and that's not, you can't like switch that. He has said about a lot of things about his wife and his daughter. So I feel like, again, where do you draw the line? Where do you go too far with this kind of stuff? People love to say it's just a business, it's just a fight game, but there's a point where I feel like you kind of have to stop and just, I don't know, just like, when does it kind of like, how far will people go with this in future is my kind of point, because Conor's in his late mid-30s, I would say, same with Colby, and they aren't getting any younger, and you have a next generation of fighters who maybe will look at this and sort of mimic it. It just made me think with MMA, what direction is it going in that sense? Because what Masvidal did wasn't good, don't get it twisted at all, basically thug behaviour. But again, the UFC kind of greenlight this type of stuff when you let a guy like Colby say what he wants. I mean, Colby did say one thing in Colby's fights. He said the stuff about Matt Hughes after the Robbie Lawler fight. He said that to Kamaru Usman about that he gave Glenn Robertson a heart attack from, I think, all the times he was ducking him or whatever, and all this kind of stuff. And it I don't know, it gets too far. He also said something about mentioning tribes to Kamaru Usman. And again, people might find this funny, but this is what I say with MMA and boxing, it differs. Because I think if you said that stuff in boxing, you really would not get away with it, especially with the amount of, if you took the angle of the amount of African and African American fighters that kind of in the sport, especially. And, you don't really get away with saying stuff like that. Same with what Conor said about Khabib's dad. I don't think that would fly in boxing. I remember when Deontay Wilder said he wanted to have a body on his record, and he got investigated for it. David A said that Tony Boy would wake up in a hospital with his kids there. He got investigated for that, and that is nowhere near as bad as what Conor or Colby have said. So it kind of shows you, I think boxing is a little bit more civilized because it's been around for so long. And you've had guys like Muhammad Ali, guys like Floyd Mayweather, Nas down the years who kind of, obviously Ali was the main one for it. But even Ali, legend that he is, even he went too far sometimes. But again, this was a completely different time. Now, it's a bit more, like I say, it's a gentleman's sport. They try to keep it a bit more civil. But in MMA, I feel like because it's still quite a young sport, it feels like there's still a bit of a mentality where it almost hasn't got an identity. People are almost willing to let fighters say what they want, and you sort of chalk it up to them selling the fight or in them just playing a character. And again, I feel sometimes one of these days it's going to go wrong. They let Conor essentially say whatever he wanted to Khabib, and yeah, nothing happened before the fight, but after the fight was done, we saw what happened. He went out and started a whole brawl after the fact, and I didn't really think it was that crazy because ultimately I didn't really disagree with Khabib's reasoning for it. And with Masvidal, again, what he did wasn't good, but this is the type of thing that you kind of, like I said, you greenlight it when you let people say what they want and you don't have a filter. And I'm all for free speech, but I feel sometimes, should there be should the UFC do something where if a guy says something and it goes a bit far, should they kind of step in and almost not do a box and do investigate it, but I don't know, just regulate it a bit more? Because I'm not saying I don't want it all to be regulated, but I feel like you kind of, if you're willing to let fighters say what they want, when this stuff like this happens, you can't really be that surprised because ultimately it does go beyond just them fighting each other. Like with Colby and Masvidal, Colby dominated him for 25 minutes. It wasn't even close, but for Masvidal, he's a street fighter. He doesn't really care for all that stuff. Similar with the Diaz brothers, they're kind of were willing to go out on the street and fight. And yeah, it's a ugly situation, this one, and I don't know how this is going to get resolved with Masvidal and Colby, but I don't know. I feel I just hope that I'm all for the personal rivalries, but sometimes when it goes too far, like Conor Khabib one is to me the most toxic one out of all, and that went way too far to talking about wives and stuff like that. So I feel like with trash talking MMA, it's getting to a point where I feel like, I don't know, I just think it's getting a bit too far with, again, the UFC, Dana letting them say whatever they wanted, you know. Khabib never said anything really personal over the line to me, to Conor, but when he did the thing with jumping of the octagon, they all had an issue with him for it, but they never had an issue with what Conor said. So like I said, you kind of, and it's a similar thing, like some people just don't really take, like there's some people who can kind of, like Usman's an example of, I don't think must have took some of what Colby said to heart, but when they fought, Kamaru Usman and Colby, he kind of just let it all happen in the octagon, and then after the fact, he just shook hands with them. Some guys can kind of take it and just be relaxed with it. And some guys just really don't play that game and really are almost purists in that sense and will only care about the fight. And if you go further than that, then it gets more personal, you know. I look at some fighters, I don't know this for a fact, but I feel like Khamzat Chimaev might be one of them where if you go personal with him, he really isn't going to take it that well. But yeah, just my thoughts. I find it quite interesting, this topic of trash talk, specifically in MMA. Like I said, in boxing, it's not as much of an issue. Like even, I think the last fight I can remember, or high profile fight that had a lot of people going back and forth, was Kambosos and Teofimo. And again, never really went personal. It was just sort of what it was. Yeah, I think again, boxing is more of a civilized, not civilized sport, but it's more of a, seen as more of a gentleman's sport. So you don't really get these sort of issues. But because MMA is so young, I feel like it's still trying to find its identity, and that, because of that, things like this will happen and will probably still happen until they kind of figure out. If they want it to be a sort of free for all of saying what they want, that's fine. But then, unfortunately, you kind of are going to get stuff like this. You're going to have things will happen with Khabib and McGregor, and you'll have, you know, bigger issues in the future. You have what, not the same sort of thing, it was a bit of a different situation, but you'll have the same thing what happened with Masvidal and Leon Edwards. You know, you'll get guys sort of fighting outside of the octagon and getting your fights in legal problems like this. So I think Colby has pressed charges on this, so I do wonder, you know, how this will turn out. Interesting to note, Khabib did actually come out and say, and this is where I say about purists, that fighters should just refuse to take fights with Colby because he talks about people's wives, people's kids. And I don't know if I go that far with it, but I do kind of get what he's saying. He's very much, again, doesn't condone any of that stuff. So, because of it happened to him, and I don't think he'd, again, it's all about respect for people like Khabib, who are like pure martial arts. GSP was the same. So I do somewhat understand. I mean, guys like Michael Bisping used to trash talk a lot, but it was never personal. And I think that's why, you know, GSP you never got to see what happened if somebody talked like that to him about his family and stuff. But yeah, I hope that it gets resolved soon. So, because I don't know if Masvidal, I do wonder if Masvidal will fight in UFC again after this, because it is a really bad thing that happened, and does make you. I mean, he knows Masvidal Colby, so maybe it won't be the case. Will Colby rethink this whole thing of trying to do it, of trying this whole character and going crazy with it, if this is the type of thing that's going to happen? Because although he dominated him in the octagon, nobody wants to get jumped, no matter if you're a fighter or not. And I think he got his tooth knocked out. So yeah, it's a mad situation. But and yeah, interesting turn of events. My next video will be a preview of UFC 273. And yeah, until next time.